In this video, we're going to look at the connectives and not. So they're very simple. There's no real funny business here. So the good ones to start with. Okay, first thing to talk about is the notion of truth functionality. So a connective is used truth functionally if and only if the truth value of the sentences using it is determined entirely by the truth values of the components. Right. So you take, for example, Aristotle is not dead. The truth value of this sentence is determined just by the truth value of the sentence Aristotle is dead, right? If Aristotle is dead is true, then Aristotle is not dead. Aristotle is not dead is false. If Aristotle is dead is false, then Aristotle is not dead is true. Likewise here, Socrates is bald and Aristotle is dead. The only thing that determines whether this is true or false is whether Socrates is bald is true or false, and whether Aristotle is dead is true or false. That's Socrates. You can decide for yourself whether you count that as bald. That's Aristotle. He's dead. He's real dead. Um, Now, the sentential connectives in English are generally not truth functional. So you have a lot of shades of meaning that go beyond the truth values of the component sentences. And this applies even to something as simple as and. So, like, you look at these two sentences, right? He got out of bed and put on his pants. He put on his pants and got out of bed. These don't mean exactly the same thing, right? This one seems to indicate that first he put on his pants and got out of bed. And then this one seems to indicate like something, the more normal way of doing it, where you get up first and then you get dressed. Um, these sorts of shades of meaning, right, in truth functional logic, we just ignore, right? So, I mean, there's a rule in English that when you present information, if the information comes in a temporal order, you will present the information in the order that it came in. That's what you have going on here, right? If you say he put on his pants and got out of bed, the fact that you ordered the those phrases in that way indicates that that's the order in which they happened. In truth functional logic, that rule just doesn't apply, right? The only thing that matters here is whether this is true and whether this is true. It's just those truth values that determine the truth value of this. The time that they happen, the relative time, doesn't matter. So the order of conjunctions actually just has no relevance to their truth value. If you want to talk about times, then of course you can, right? You just need special operators for that, which we're not going to get into in this course. So yeah, so the connectives of SL, right, unlike the English words that they apply to, are purely truth functional. Anything else with them just doesn't apply at all. So you need to remember when you're symbolizing that anything that's going on in the sentence or in the meaning of the word that you're symbolizing that's not truth functional is not going to be captured in the resulting molecular sentence of SL. But the advantage of going with truth functional connectives in SL is that the meaning that they have can be given by what are called characteristic truth values, or sorry, characteristic truth tables. And what these do is, I mean, because their meaning is purely truth functional, then the way that we characterize their meaning is we just have a table that specifies the possible values that the components can have, and then what value the molecular sentence that contains that connective would take. So they look like this, right? Over here you have, so okay, so first of all, just remember that P and Q here, these meta variables that can stand for any sentence of SL, right? Because they're in boldface, right? They're the meta variables. Over here, then we have, these are the four possible combinations of truth values that P and Q could have, right? Both true, both false. P is true, Q is false, P is false, Q is true, right? Those are the only four possible combinations. And then in this column over here, the characteristic truth table will say what truth value the connective has in each of these combinations. And if the connective is truth functional, then the characteristic truth table will exhaustively specify the meaning of the connective, which just vastly simplifies things, tremendously for all sorts of purposes. Okay, so here is the characteristic truth table for conjunction. Um, the a conjunction is it is true if both of the conjuncts are true. So these here, right? The inputs, you can think of them like inputs, right? Or the the sentences that are that are the parts of the conjunction, right? The conjuncts. If both of them are true, then the conjunction is true, and if any one of them or both are false, then the conjunction is false. And this is the truth functional use of the English word and. It captures that. Now with the symbol, let me actually go back for a second. So the symbol that the textbook uses for characterizing conjunction is this is called an ampersand. It's actually a stylized version of the Latin word et, which is Latin for and, stylized into a single thing. If you look at it sort of very closely here, you can kind of see lowercase e and t that have been brought together. Um, that is often difficult to draw, though a lot of people find it difficult to draw. And so what you can use as an alternative is this symbol. This is an inverted wedge, and it's commonly used as an alternative symbol for conjunction. Note that this generally doesn't apply for the symbols of SL. You can substitute out the ampersand because that's one that historically causes a lot of problems. You can't generally substitute out the symbols in this course. Um, oh, and then one thing particularly, so you can replace the ampersand with the inverted wedge, right? This is fine. One thing that you absolutely can't do though is, although people are sometimes, well, often tempted to do this, is for conjunction, what they write is plus. You can't do this in logic. Plus does not mean conjunction. Um, for reasons that we might get into later on. Actually, in this course, probably not. They mainly have to do with the way the probability theory works, actually, or the probability calculus. When plus is used as a symbol in symbolic logic, it means or. It does not mean and. So you can't use it for conjunction. It ends up being extremely confusing. Um, you can use the try to draw the ampersand. If you can't draw the ampersand, then you can use the wedge, the inverted wedge. Um, okay. Now, when we're symbolizing into SL, there are two steps that you want to follow. And the reason for this is that ordinary language, it just doesn't capture the logical form of sentences very well. So what you try to do is you try to break the symbolization process down into two parts. One is where you're still working with basically English sentences, but you're making the logical form more clear and more precise so that it's easier to work with. And then in the second step, you're actually taking that and you're turning it into something that is SL. Um, so the first step is this: you make a paraphrase of the English sentence, right? And this is a sentence that what it does is it clearly indicates the simple sentences and the truth functional sentential connectives. Um, and then what you'll do after this is you'll replace the sentential connectives with the corresponding operators of SL and the simple sentences with the atomic sentences of SL. So at this stage, what you're basically doing is you're taking the English sentence and you're sort of forcing it into a form that fits the way that it would work as a sentence of SL. And then when in here, then you're taking that new sentence that you've produced and you're turning it into an actual sentence of SL. And by breaking it down into these two steps, the whole symbolization process becomes much simpler. Now, the thing is that the point of the paraphrasing method is to help you with symbolization. And so you don't have to follow the precise method that's given in the textbook. You can modify this to suit your own preferences. There are actually, like, later in these slides, I'm, going to recommend some modifications that I think would, probably simplify things or make it easier to use. There are different paraphrasing methods. There's another textbook, for example, we worked with for a while at Athabasca, where the paraphrasing system was actually the opposite. Instead of going through, so this method basically has you go through, identify the logical form first, identify the truth functional sentential connectives, you standardize all of those, and then you do the symbolization. The method that this textbook used actually had you go through and identify the atomic sentences first and replace those with sentence letters. And then you went through and you figured out the logical form. That one is trickier to do. Like it, and then you would end up, when you applied that, you actually ended up having to break down that second step into multiple steps typically. The one advantage that it did have was that if you were writing this out by hand, it was less writing. Um, but given that, I mean, if you're typing and you can cut and paste, that doesn't really, it's not much of an advantage. The thing is that feel free, to modify the system, right? As if you find ways of paraphrasing that are going to be easier for you. Okay, so when you're paraphrasing conjunction, what the textbook tells you to do is paraphrase it with both and. The both goes in front of the first conjunct, and then the and goes in between them. These are underlined, and you underline them to indicate that they're truth functional sentential connectives. The underlining is really important. I would not drop that from, like, whatever changes you're making to the paraphrasing method. I would not drop the underlining. The underlining is really, really valuable because it makes it stand out. Um, the both, the textbook uses the both to tell you where the conjunction starts, right? So in Aristotle is dead and Socrates is bald, you have both Aristotle is dead and Socrates is bald. That tells you where the middle of the conjunction is. That tells you where it starts. Um, I mean, this is a very simple sentence, and so it's obvious where it's going to start. But if this was a compound of a larger sentence, you might actually need something that tells you where the conjunction starts. What might work better is, than the textbook method, is instead of the both, is actually just start putting in parentheses at the paraphrasing stage. So have and, underline the and, right? That indicates the middle of the conjunction. And then you put parentheses around the beginning and the end of it. Um, I mean, the parentheses they're familiar from algebra. They're quite, they're quite intuitive. So that may be, you may find that to be sort of easier than the textbook method. You can, play around with both and just see whichever works better for you. Um, okay, so when you're symbolizing English, this is a non-exhaustive list of words that conjunction symbolizes, right? So and, but, however, although, nevertheless, nonetheless, moreover, these are all conjunction words. One thing that's very common is that conjunctions in English are shortened, right? So Socrates is wise and Aristotle is wise. This is something that you would basically never find in English, right? The way that it's stated is Socrates and Aristotle are wise. When you paraphrase, though, one of the things you need to do is you need to break this up. And so the shortened version gets turned into this. You need to do that when you're paraphrasing because these are separate sentence letters and you want to represent them as separate sentence letters, rather than leaving it like this, where where you're leaving the logical form ambiguous. This is, this is closer to the way that you're going to have to actually symbolize it. There are a lot of non-truth functional shades of meaning that you'll get. One of the things that's very, very common is when this is words like but, however, nevertheless, they'll indicate surprise about one of the conjuncts. So compare she is a lawyer and she is honest versus she is a lawyer but she is honest, right? The but here indicates a certain amount of surprise about the fact that she's honest. Um, when we're symbolizing, we just ignore this, right? This is non-truth functional. So both of these in SL are just treated as conjunctions and they're just treated as meaning exactly the same thing. Okay, so that's conjunction. Next, we have negation. Um, it's a little bit weird to call negation a connective. because of the fact that it doesn't actually connect anything to anything, um, it just modifies a single sentence. It goes in front of a sentence to modify it. And logicians then, they explain the difference by saying that, well, negation is a unary connective and the other ones are binary connectives, which doesn't really make it any less weird, but that's how it is. Um, so the negation goes in front of a single sentence, and what it does is it flips truth values. So the negation of P, if P is true, the negation of P is false. If P is false, the negation of P is true. Um, in English, we normally represent negation with the word not, or you'll get many prefixes like un, in, non, right? So Wittgenstein was not bald. That's a picture of Wittgenstein. You can see very much not bald. Kant was unmarried. Here you have un as the way of representing the negation. Um, the way that the textbook paraphrases negation is with it is not the case that. This is a wordy phrase, but it has the advantage that it goes in front of the entire sentence. And so your negation, what you're using to paraphrase negation goes where the negation symbol would go. So you have your words that are going to go in your sentence letter that are coming right after your words that represent your negation. So you would paraphrase those sentences with, it is not the case that Wittgenstein was bald. It is not the case that Kant was married. Um, as you get maybe, more practiced with doing paraphrases, you may want to shorten this. Like often, what people will do actually is they'll just shorten it to underlined not. So that would just be not Wittgenstein was bald, not Kant was married. At this point, you're not technically dealing with English sentences anymore, but once you've gotten the hang of the paraphrasing method, right, it may help you, even though it's not technically grammatical.